from Zooming in from India and other places. So welcome to those people outside Australia and welcome to those people inside Australia. I'm Megan Watkins and I'm the acting HDR director, and I'm here to introduce our speaker today, who is Dr. Fiona Cameron. Fiona is a senior research fellow I can't say here because here doesn't mean anything anymore, does it really? So she is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Culture and Society at Western Sydney. Fiona's research and writing focuses on the idea of museum and interrelationships between institutions and contemporary societies in an increasingly complex and globalised world. And I think we've got evidence of that here today. Fiona works across two broad fields. The first examines the agency of the museum sector in public culture in the representation of hot topics of societal significance and climate change. And the second area of research interest investigates digital technologies and heritage collections. And I think it's probably in that latter field, although Fiona might correct me, that the topic of today has considerable relevance. So I'm not going to spend much more time talking, just to say that Fiona will be presenting today on Braidotti and Haraway, Reframing Human Beings in a More Than Human World, which I'm keen to hear about, and I'm sure others are as well. This is just to let you know that the Fiona's presentation will be, and I think the questions afterwards, unless Simone wants to correct me, will be recorded. So please indicate in the chat if you don't want to be recorded. But Fiona will be speaking for about an hour, and then she'll be responding to questions. And as we're on Zoom, we're not a really big group, but it can be a little bit difficult. So it's probably a good idea if people have questions, if you pop them in the chat, and I'll look at those and can advise Fiona on the questions towards the end. So. Unless Fiona has anything else to say, or anybody else, I'll pass it over to Fiona. So thanks very much for presenting today.
Well, thank you, Megan, for that introduction. Yes, so I'm going to be talking about two key thinkers, Rosie Braidotti and Dr Haraway, and I've been working quite closely with Rosie in the last few years, and we've got a couple of projects going at the moment. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But it was great to have this opportunity to really look at Donna. I mean, I'm very familiar with Rosie's work, but really looking into great depth into Donna's work as well. Incidentally, they're both very good friends, but they have very different views on the whole notion of the post-human. And I'll talk a bit more about that. So Rosie and Donna are two of the most powerful and influential contemporary theorists. Both Braidotti and Haraway are interested in interrogating the limitations of Western humanism, its disciplines, politics and capitalist underpinnings, and reworking, most importantly, the binaries of nature and culture. And that is a lever of thinking differently in the world in a more responsible way. And both these thinkers do this in aligned but quite different ways. So through a series of creative interventions, both seek to articulate a broader, viable, more than human politic after humanism in order to survive on the earth, well in the face of environmental exhaustion, mass extinctions, gender and social inequality, climate change, and more recently the COVID-19 pandemic, which Rosie has written about recently. So Rosie is most interested in framing her intervention through reworking the position of the human in these social collectives and the production of new knowledge that emerges through these complex entanglements. Haraway describes herself as a storyteller in which her thoughts and experiences of being in the world and through her engagement with biological research articulates new life forms and connections between species founded on the ethics of care, responsibility and attunement. I'll just share screen here. So what I plan to do here is to discuss two of these remarkable women's work through their most recent works, and that is Post-Human Knowledge for Rosie, and for Donna it's Staying with the Trouble. And both of these reflect their most recent attempts to find new ways of thinking and acting within the Anthropocene and beyond. So in Staying with the Trouble, Haraway calls for a need to reflect and think on the possibilities of facing the era after or the post-Anthropocene, the era which she calls the Choltocene. So dominant approaches to ecological collapse are based on faith in techno-fixes, that technology will somehow come to the rescue, or a position that the game is over, one of despair, that it's too late, there's no sense of trying to do anything better. So it's against these two propositions that she proposes we attempt to stay with the trouble, that is, to face the situation head on, with the recognition that we require each other in unexpected collaborations and combinations. We become with each other. For Haraway, the Choltocene is an era in which humans will confront its arrogance and superiority. It is an era in which humans will make kin with tentacles, spiders, bacteria, different ways of perceiving, living and dying, and becoming with in n-dimensional time spaces. Some concepts in the Choltocene, especially its n-dimensional time spaces and becoming with, are inspired by Deleuze and Guattari's concept of becoming. Informed by biological relatings, the entanglements of species in the actual existence of an n-dimensional time space that Haraway suggests will comprise this futuristic Choltocene she talks about. Now, based on the idea of becoming with other humans, but more importantly with non-human others, Haraway traces a possible refiguring of the way we exist on this planet in the present, leading to an imaginable future that narrowly avoids our currently impending destruction. Along the way, she is guided by the framing motif SF, that's science fiction, speculative fabrication, string figures, speculative feminism and science. So one of the most interesting features of Staying with the Trouble is the string figures. So SF. SF are productive concepts that enclose action, fabulation and potentialities of engagements. SF are inspired and shaped by different sources, from Navajo string figure plays and Hozobo relationships between humans and non-humans as order, harmonic and right relationships, to storytellings, to science fiction, to speculative fabrication and thinking, and also to scientific facts. The metaphor of the SF is linked to the idea of ongoingness and to the possibility of collective practices of thinking, making, and copulating. The entanglements created by becoming with multiple species aim for a flourishing and a rise of responsibilities of the multiple entangled species. And another framing that's very important in this Chaldean is tenacular thinking, suggests the breaking of the binary through bodily practices and networks composed by trajectories, patternings, and lines. The tenacular rather entangles the strings to collectively think and make kin with unknowns in storytellings that have been told and yet to come. Another key concept is this idea of symbiosis, and it's a way to get a handle on the complex relations that produce life. And Haraway develops these ideas by discussing developmental biologist Scott Gilbert's work. Symbiosis are contact zones in the ongoing Chaldean. The symbiotic is contrasted with the autobiotic in the sense that the former relates to the making of each other in the collective entanglement. So symbiosis means making with. Nothing makes itself. Nothing is really autopoietic or self-organizing. Symbiosis is put to work to explain the complex, dynamic, responsive, situated historical systems. Symbiosis unfolds autopoiesis and generatively unfurls and extends it. Extending the notion of autopoietic life in this way is possible because we now have the genomic and molecular tools to study the relationships between microbes and multicellular life forms. And this is, Haraway draws on this research in the use of her case studies throughout the book. This term was developed by Lynn Margulis in recognition of the fact that what we once called an individual species, and it's the way we think basically as individual species, is actually a set of symbiotic associations between a macroorganism and the microbes that live on and with it. In this view, we see species as ecosystems, and what we can call that ecosystem a holobiotic. The holobiotic that we refer to as Homo sapiens is a symbiotic assemblage that includes all the bacteria and other microbes that help us to make us what we are. So all plants, animals, and fungi come into being through a complex of associations with and between microorganisms. Multicellular life has evolved out of these associations and continues to depend on them. So all these concepts, elements, are built around a material semiotic. That's practices of worlding and materialism and of making with, that Haraway draws from the work of Vivero de Castro on animism. In Staying with the Trouble, Haraway recognises Southern Aboriginal and academic approaches, although they are mentioned in the book. Haraway does not profoundly engage with these approaches. The notion of thinking with and making with is evident in other geographies. And I think the lack of recognition of other ways of becoming deserves critique. There are many First Nations communities in the global south that approach these relations with the non-human in a different way from that seen with dominant North American culture. Basically, these many nature cultures. By failing to engage with other nature cultures, the work operates in a bit of a fictional sphere instead of recognising the material intermingling characteristics of other First Nations communities and elaborating in these many different forms. Another problem is the focus on biological entanglements. What about the earthly processes and inorganic and inanimate things, beings that are not, and this is a big one for me. I think it's too biologically focused. Her ideas are presented as both experimental and material on one hand. that is the entanglements of biological entities, but her SF and storytelling are portrayed as fictional forms of storytelling in a way to create a picture of what the Cholocene might look like. So Haraway recognises the Cholocene as an era for reconsidering life and death. There is also a need to recognise the possibility of the self-extinction of species in the awareness of these entanglements, and also include examples of how SF tenacular thinking and becoming with can be self-destructive of life itself. Oh, hang on. Haraway uses the idea of composting or the compost pile instead of a post-human approach. Her general critique, and I agree with it, is that the post-human is still centred on the anthropos, or the human, and leaves behind other spatio-temporal agencies. And of course, because her approach is too biological, well, in terms of how I view it, she does not engage the uncertainties and disparate practices of matter. None of these are folded into her vision of the Cholocene. Haraway's awareness of the possibilities of thinking in different forms and an ethical commitment to thinking with, as opposed to the myth of the hubris, human, focused on thinking for themselves or ourselves, is its strength that makes her thought so vital for thinking and acting in the world differently. Alongside this is the recognition of the importance of new knowledge from the biological sciences, knowledge that we might call the extended evolutionary synthesis framework, beyond just the exchange of DNA, as we've seen with Darwin's evolutionary theory. And also she engages strongly with art and science that helps to articulate an ethics of living and dying together on a damaged planet. Now, the book is divided into 8 chapters. The first 4 chapters are distinctly theoretical, directed to the conceptualization of string figures, SF, tenacular thinking, symbiosis, and the Cholocene. And the second part provides more practical examples of becoming with other species and elements to show how the Cholocene can shape and transform our human ways to relate to other species in the planet. The last part builds on science fiction, and storytelling is a way to present the forms of the Cholocene may have. So overall, Haraway engages with Northern First Nations perspectives, feminist theory, biology, ecology, and post-human theory. The nomad is presented in the process of becoming, that for Haraway is always becoming with other species. So more importantly, one of its central features is that tenacular webs of troubling relationships that matter in the contemporary world, and not that of the hubris individuals' thought and actions. For Haraway, it rests on our ability to really think the thick present. The thick present is a spatial ethics, a space of thought, action, movement, and exchange based on biological formations of thinking and making with in empirical situations, and as a means to rethink what it means to act ethically. There's no time in history in the human sense, but rather holds open a space to include stories of repression and resistance that stretch back hundreds of years, and at the same time includes generations of humans living in the planet yet to come. Now, interestingly, Haraway is quite critical of the term Anthropocene. She suggests it runs the risk of being both too big and not big enough, because it doesn't allow us to think with and make with. And I totally agree with that. That's why I don't sort of engage the Anthropocene myself in my work. It acts as a critique of Western philosophy and political economics, but it's not a concept or term that allows us to think with or act with. In addition, its centre is is man, the hubris human, separate, above and apart from the rest of animals, who is the product of political economy, Western philosophy, and Christian theology. So returning to the Chaldean, it is the powerfully specific tenacular webs of relatedness that are critical to our existence. It's a name for those who are bound to the earth with all of its troubles, critters of all types of whom escape from the trouble, for whom escaping from the trouble is a techno-fantasy, and staying with it involves cultivating ethical response abilities. The specific figuring of these connections is unique and founded on biological diversity. Rather, everything is connected to something, which is connected to something else. While we may all ultimately be connected to one another, the specificity and proximity of connections matters. Who we are bound up with and in what ways. It is this form of connection that sets Haraway apart from other thinkers such as Barrard, who focuses on matter and interactions, or Braidotti, who focuses on the post-human convergence. But it resonates more strongly with Tim Morton's idea of the mesh, which is also biological in its figuration, but perhaps not as thick presence as in regard to compost, in which Haraway imagined these connections to unfold. So for her, life and death happens inside these relationships. In this regard, we need to understand how particularly human communities, as well as those of other living beings, are entangled, how these entanglements are implicated in the production of both extinctions and their accompanying patterns of amplified death. So in terms of method, in respect to Haraway's Chaldean, we need to consider who is bound up with whom and in what ways. We need to make new knots in these webs, new ways to be bound into relationships that matter. This is where art and all matter of creative practices plays a role. It's a thinking and making with, it's a compositional process. It is one of the means that we have for thinking and making significant bonds between ourselves and the prospects of other critters as a mode of responsible thinking, acting, and design. So what constitutes a complex enough or simple enough world is itself a challenging question, in which Haraway seeks to do in her own way through her biological refigurations. The politics of what becomes a relational model system is an important part of Haraway's discussion. Developing new model systems that are suited to the study of relationalities have important implications for both politics, the humanities, and biological sciences of the 21st century. But building models is very risky. How can you build an empathetic engagement? What forms of thinking work? Are they complex enough? Can you work with them? Does their complexity defy any form of empirical engagement? So Haraway's Chaldean involves describing the webs of who are bound up with and in what ways, but also finding ways of making these new knots. And this really comes out through her Camille stories, a series of speculative fabulations what form the final chapter of Staying with the Trouble. The Camille's, 5 generations of them are Sims, people humans who have been genetically modified to enter in symbiosis with animals of various kinds. Chameleon-1's symbiotic fusing with the monarch butterfly causes changes in the coloration of its skin that mirror various stages in the transition from caterpillar to mature butterfly. Here, the camele stories reimagine how technologies of genetic modification have been appropriated by humans. Haraway invokes the production of GMOs, herbicide-resistant plants, and pesticides that have destroyed the plants that monarch butterflies depend on for sustenance during their migration. However, rather than appealing to the myth of an unalterable natural order, she offers us an alternative use of genetic modification, one that creates diversity among humans and aligns our fate with species whose lifeways we have disrupted or destroyed. Haraway also provides us with the means to think about what kinds of biological model systems that she describes might apply to thought in the humanities. Her approach and the way she writes emphasises how seriously she takes the task of doing thinking work with other thinking subjects. This involves showing how her thinking develops, and this is quite a unique way that she works with her figurations. So the biological systems that Haraway discusses are put to work to model aspects of these constitutive relatings. So while we might want to claim thinking as an exclusively human activity, the thinking that Haraway does in models goes beyond this. It seeks to test our capacity for empathetic projection, to think the thoughts of critters. But all this directs our attention to how anthropomorphizing is problematic. But we can learn from extraordinary thinkers such as Haraway that a certain type of anthropomorphic thought can help us to find better ways of living and dying together, and help us move beyond the wholesale death and destruction that we've created through our anthropocentric practices. Overall, staying with the troubles shows us how we might do some vital thinking in these troubling times. Now I'm going to talk about Rosie's work. Rosie Braidotti's interest, as she explains, is positing a relational model for thinking and acting in a contemporary and emerging world revolves around the question of what defines the human. In academic circles, what is human about the humanities? Both of these figurations of the human have been shaken up by the radical critiques of humanism and the displacement of anthropomorphism, driven in part by rapid advances in our knowledge of living systems and of their genetic and algorithmic codes, environmental destruction, and also coupled with the global expansion of a knowledge-intensive capitalism. In Post-Human Knowledge, Braidotti takes a closer look at the impact of these developments on three major areas: the constitution of subjectivity, the general production of knowledge, and the practice of the academic humanities. Drawing on feminist, post-colonial, anti-racist theory, she argues that the human has never been a neutral category, but one always linked to power and privilege. That we must move beyond the old dualities in which man defined himself and beyond the sexualized and racialized others that have been excluded from humanity or humanism. Post-human knowledge, as Braidotti understands it, is not so much an alternative form of knowledge, but a critical call, a call to build a multi-layered and multi-directional project that displaces anthropocentrism while pursuing the analysis of the discriminatory and violent aspects of human activity and interaction wherever they occur. So situated between the scientific and technological advances on one hand and the threat of climate change devastation on the other, the post-human convergence is a concept she uses to articulate the entangling of humans with technology, with non-human others, and with earthly matter. All this encourages us to think hard and creatively about what we are in these processes of becoming. Post-human knowledge is challenging and a dense read, partly because it's written for a philosophy audience, but it offers some very timely affirmative messages that are much needed in society generally as we cope with current complexities, not the least of which includes the current COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has emerged through the interaction of humans and animals. It has spread rapidly around the world due to global travel, and the news of its impact invades our awareness through television, radio, news apps, and social media. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed numerous social issues that have been quietly converging for decades. It's brought to light wealth disparities in which the ability to work from home via technology is available only to the wealthy. The poor are forced to continue working in unsafe conditions, potentially exposing them to the virus. Furthermore, wealthy and powerful entities are actively using social media to discredit scientific evidence supporting social distancing and self-isolation practices. These examples attest to the complex and dynamic convergence of socio-cultural, political, environmental, material, technological, and capitalist practices that are continually reshaping and legitimizing certain kinds of knowledge and power. Braidotti's post-humanist approach, however, foregrounds the critical potential of what she calls the critical post-humanities. Her materialist affirmative ethics offers the post-human subject a way to move towards empowerment and creativity with others, all of which are knowledge producers and have agency, in which the human becomes situated and refocused in these entangled formations. Like Haraway, it is a way of moving beyond despair and activating a different type of aesthetic. So post-human knowledge comprises six chapters: the post-human condition, post-human subjects, post-human knowledge production, the critical post-humanities, how to do post-human thinking, on affirmative ethics, and the inexhaustible. Braidotti's background is in continental philosophy as well as radical feminism, radical anti-fascism, and anti-racism. She works with process ontology. She uses her own concept of Zoe, which is vital, self-organising matter, as well as elements of inspiration from Deleuze and Guattari, Foucault. Agrari as well. Posthumanism emerged from the so-called radical epistemologies over the past 30 years as a reaction to European humanist thought, which placed the human, that is male European perspectives, at the centre of concern, along with specific historically situated social cultural structures and inequalities. The radical and critical studies began questioning this underlying assumption of the humanities. Feminism, for example, raises awareness of the embodied, embedded, and sexualized roots of subjectivity. Braidotti claims we're situated, feminist-minded, anti-racist, post- and decolonial thinkers and practitioners who are trying to come to terms with the challenges of the post-human convergence while avoiding a universal posture on undue generalisations. Braidotti highlights the challenges the world is currently facing, such as the sixth extinction, the fourth industrial revolution and advanced capitalism. As evidenced by the rise of popularism, materialism, anxiety and ecological disaster, she argues that these factors weigh heavily upon us psychologically and politically. The current technological revolution, she explains, not only intensifies these fears, but also spreads them to a new dimension that is both planetary, global, and very intimate, local. The post-human convergence, she argues, is complex and multi-layered. At first, these challenges appear negative and insurmountable. However, Braidotti argues that post-humanist critique can provide us with ways to conceptualise our existence and thereby enhance our capacity to move forward in a positive manner. Now, some of her key themes are the reworking of subjectivity, and it's a central concept in post-human knowledge. She refigures the human subject as post-human. And the post-human subject is a convergence of Zoe, the life of all living things, bios, the life of humans organised in society, and technology. Although the post-human subject is a reaction to the notion of the human, the intent is not to reject the human, but to put the human back in their rightful place with the rest of the world, in which is inanimate, is integrated but also emerging. A major goal is to avoid binaries of nature, culture, subject, object, or human, non-human into new types of relationships. Braidotti's conception of post-humanism is not inhuman like other post-humanity subjects, but a convergence of Zoe, bios, techno through material inanimates. Consciousness is then distributed. Ontologically, the world is contiguous and co-constructed. In this way, all matter, creatures and people are of equal importance. Since all entities matter, post-humanism exposed power hierarchies that have traditionally excluded and dehumanized others. And that's not just human others, but all others. This post-humanist perspective acknowledges multiplicity, but avoids moving into relativism because it takes into consideration situatedness. This is a very important concept for her. The proper subject of the post-human convergence is not man, but a new collective subject. We are all in this together, but we are not one and the same kind of subject. Her other central figuration is the notion of affirmative ethics. Within a post-human framework, the subject's ethical core should not be defined in terms of intentionality, but as its forces and effects. Ethics is defined as the pursuit of affirmative values and relations, and politics is a pragmatic practice of implementing them. Ethical power can only be understood in terms of poentia, or the empowerment. Another key feature is this notion of cartography. And the post-human cartography is a way of mapping both the positive and empowering features of phenomenon, as well as the negative ones such as inequality, discrimination, and exclusion. And rejecting universalism and transcendental normative consciousness, Braidotti recommends adoption of transversal subjectivity, grounded in inanimate interconnections and generative difference. Terms such as human and normal connote a universal conception of what it means to be a valued subject, ascribe certain powers, privileges and legitimacy. In a transversal approach, different entities can relate to multiple others in a productive and mutually enforcing manner in creating a community that actualizes this ethical propensity. In this way, posthuman subjects are both empowered and empowering. And in acting affirmative ethics, we acknowledge our relationality within these larger assemblages and communities. Engaging in posthuman thought means creating new ways of thinking and increases our ability to locate positive, alternative, non-hierarchical, respectful ways of interacting within these these assemblages. So posthumanist thinking and research requires researchers to step outside of the anthropocentric mindset that only human qualities and desires and intent matter, to defamiliarize the taking for granted, bring to surface the invisible or forgotten, to dislodge universal thinking that we're all the same, and to reject power hierarchies, the only one that is seen as valuable. It requires researchers to consider posthuman subjects as constantly becoming, motion us towards what we could be, the virtual, instead of having already crystallized identities. Materialist cartographic methodology is highly interdisciplinary and uses methods that already exist in social sciences research and critical studies. Cartography is a means of situating knowledge claims and examining power structures by mapping differences as well as similarities. Cartographic accounts share inanimate perspectives that honour the materiality of discursive production and the relational structure of subjectivity. Cartography should be empirically verifiable, faithful to experimental accounts, and avoid reductionist summaries and categorisation. Braidotti argues that posthumanist methodology must resist grand theories while staying grounded through embodied and embedded perspectives. In this way, the figurations or maps retain their local situated perspectives and avoid universal claims. Accounts are often non-linear and reflect non-hierarchical complexities and multiplicities. Cartographic accounts should help defamiliarise taking for granted assumptions and practices. Although the main purpose of posthumanist knowledge is not necessarily to provide a step-by-step how-to guide on conducting materialist cartographies, Braidotti provides some examples of studies that qualify as posthumanist, such as Gabri's study of digital rubbish and Parika's work on geological materialism. And she's also included an account of my work on posthuman museum practices in posthuman knowledge and about the types of formations and methods I've developed there. And also that works in the posthuman glossary. So can posthumanism help us move towards a more just and sustainable way of life on the planet with finite sources and possibly finite vitality? Throughout this book, Braidotti offers a certain positive outlook in which she is critical of the blind optimism of transhumanists in the Silicon Valley type, and equally critical of dystopian views of the death of humanity. And this is where Haraway and Braidotti come together in terms of their intent. But the execution is quite different. Rather, in this book and in her other work, she envisaged great accomplishment and hope for the world. Post-humanity, conceptualized in terms of a nature-culture-techno continuum, characterized by affirmative relations. The COVID-19 pandemic raises awareness in a startling fashion of the complexities and interdependencies of humans and non-humans, not to mention the power play of power, politics and capitalism. A post-humanist affirmative ethics might help us to reconceptualise a more just post-pandemic world. For this reason, Braidotti's book is timelier than ever. So Braidotti's aim currently is to apply post-human principles across a wide range of research agendas and sectors as a series of empirical engagements. And I'm working with her on a couple of projects around museums and climate change and collections. Braidotti offers two avenues in which post-humanism can positively shape sectors and research agendas, and that is first embedding post-humanist thinking and how work is designed and conducted, embedding post-humanist values into the structure of organisations. Critical thinking in these spaces incorporates defamiliarisation, awareness raising and the unlearning of privilege. In terms of method, the application of post-human methods requires the reframing of the subject within transversal collectives. And one of the examples I've given you is the article on the green plastic bucket. So my research experimentations with post-human thinking in geomaterialisms have been put to work through a series of what I call ecological refigurations or experimentations, and that I've done work around institutional forms, collections, exhibitions, around climate change, climate science, and through digital cultural heritage. But here I prefer to use the term more than human in these in these compositions. I call them compositions. I have problems with the use of the term subjectivity, as it appears to be too human focused and at the same time insufficient. It's insufficient in its focus on the wide range of entities or coordinates and their specific affordances, powers, capacities within these social collectives. And that includes the calculative, the sensing, and not just the discursive. I think Braidotti needs to do more work on the knowledge practices of these different entities. I've also put cartography to work as a method of taking account of the forces and agencies of a whole manner of entities where the situated human is not at the forefront of these investigations. So there's much more work that needs to be done on how the post-human is to be framed in these new and more accurately and previously invisible collectives due to the stranglehold of humanism, which has prevailed in these empirical contexts. And lastly, we're hoping if things change with international travel to bring Rosie here in 2021. And we'll be running a masterclass with PhD students at the Institute and also around Australia. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I don't know if we want to have some virtual claps or whatever, but yeah, thanks, Vanika. No, that was really, really great. I found it useful to actually have an update on both Haraway and Braidotti's recent work around posthumanism. So it was really good to have that overview of both their most recent books. I've got a couple of questions here, but as I'm the chair, I'll have to wait my turn. We've had a couple of people in the chat who have indicated they've got questions. So can I ask people to put on their their camera now, because it makes it a bit nicer, if you like, to be able to see people when we've got question time. And if I could pass to Linda first, who had 2 questions to ask you, Fiona. So when you're ready, Linda, over to you.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks for that, Fiona. That was a fantastic kind of summary and overview and compare and contrast of both of these thinkers. It was, yeah, really lovely to have that summary provided. I've been working with Haraway and Braidotti over the past probably 12 months. And earlier this year, read through Post-Human Knowledge with a group of other postgrads. And I guess I would just love to get your kind of take on a couple of things that we grappled with and weren't really quite sure in terms of if we were making, you know, appropriate kind of understanding. And specifically, the words transcendence and immanence came up a lot in Braidotti's book. And you spoke just previously then about immanence referring to an emerging. Would you be able to kind of just give a little there, please?
Well, it's really, in terms of Braidotti, it's this notion of the post-human convergence and the becoming. It's really a, you know, this word's used quite widely amongst post-humanist thinkers, new materialism. So it's the emerging, or it's the becoming. Becoming's another word, emergence, becoming, within these complex formations.
As opposed to transcendence?
Which is, well, they're kind of interchangeable in a way. Well, they've been used interchangeably. And it's about the type of, well, the forces and agencies within these complex configurations. And well, I mean, change is probably a humanist sort of idea, but it's that notion of the types of effects, I suppose, that come out of those formations.
Okay. And in terms of the affirmative ethics, I think that's another space that we've grappled a little bit with, just more in terms of what does that actually look like in practice. I guess I'm in data collection phase at the moment, and ethics is a really important thing that's really close to my heart. And I love this idea of Braidotti's affirmative ethics. And I guess my interpretation, again, based on what I've read and what you just spoke about, was about attending less so to the intentionality, so my intentionality as a researcher, and more to the forces and effects that are occurring within that research assemblage that's occurring, I guess. So is that am I on the right track?
Well, it's about, I mean, there's a difference between a humanist idea of ethics and it's an ethics emerging out of these formations. And well, I kind of read it as a sort of a compositional design thinking with sort of process. This is where there is a crossover between Braidotti and Haraway in terms of their thinking with, the idea of thinking with, and thinking responsibly or responsibility, as Haraway suggests. So it's not a case of just researching these formations, but it's actually acting within these formations as well.
So is it about that, does it come back to that Deleuzian idea of the deterritorialization and the reterritorialization of those forces and effects within the rhizome?
Yes, yeah, it is quite similar. But it's also positioning yourself as a situated person in how you create those, the new sort of connections, the new knots. What sort of knots do you create? It's about a design process. Well, that's my reading of her affirmative ethics.
Well, thanks for that. I think Sky's got an extension on my ethics question.
Yeah, thanks, Guy.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to expand on Linda's question then, because I think he mentioned in the talk, as researchers and as thinkers, it's quite a contradictory theory when it comes to like interpretation and writing out observations. And you mentioned just before, like, we need to position ourselves and have this reflexive process to think more than human. But ultimately, how do we like interpret our observations without looking at intent, I guess?
Look, you can't escape it. You really can't. I think Haraway's done a really good job of trying to help us to think and write. I mean, there's no way that you can really understand what a non-human other, how they think and act, basically. I mean, we use biology, we use different tools to sort of kind of understand how other entities work, but there's always going to be an intent. But what she's saying is that you make your intent part of your thinking and writing process.
And is that where Braidotti kind of is different to Haraway, because she doesn't reject the human?
Well, Haraway, they both, neither of them reject the human. Both try to situate the human differently. Haraway is very biological in terms of human being part of these complex biological processes. Braidotti tries to situate humans in these different configurations between capitalism, technology, the non-human world, earthly processes. I think that this is what I like about Braidotti that I think Haraway misses. Like, how can you just think of humans as part of these biological things without talking about, you know, other planetary entities and, technological developments and things like that. So that's, I mean, I really like the way Haraway has refigured us in those biological contexts. She's actually got an undergrad degree in biology. I thought, I'll just have a really good check of where, what the sort of disciplinary formations that she's informed by. And then that kind of makes sense about why she's always focused on the non-human in terms of animals and the relationships with biological entities or living systems.
And that's where you've got to respect the human in your research process. Hey, thank you so much. That was excellent.
Okay, did we have any more questions? I can't see any questions in the it's Cymbeline, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm not actually using this content in my research at the moment. I mean, I may, but I'm really interested in how it might relate. And one of the central notions that I'm working with is intersubjectivity. And I'm interested to hear about your critique of Braidotti's work around subjectivity. One of the sort of elements of intersubjectivity is that it critiques even the possibility of subjectivity, that all subjectivity is fundamentally influenced by others, and that we can't possibly, and in a sense it's part of the illusion of self. And I suppose one of the elements of that illusion of self is this idea that we are a single entity. And you were speaking about this constellations of interdependent life, and I think that was Haraway notion. I'm really interested. My work is about cross-cultural communication, and I feel like there's somehow some key. This is like some sort of multiple linking element. I'd be really interested to hear you talk about those connectivities.
Well, I mean, what Braidotti is doing, she's really talking about intersubjectivity, but what she's doing is that she's saying that human subjectivity must be read as part of these broader assemblages. Whereas I sort of reject the idea of just projecting human, I mean, of course, human subjectivity is part of these extended assemblages, but she doesn't take enough attention to the other sort of entities that are a part of that process, like, you know, like algorithms. Well, they're human subjectivities in a sense too, but they also have their own subjectivity. So I think that in a way she's talking about intersubjectivity, and the transversal subject is kind of similar to types of entities or concepts in a way, but I think intersubjectivity is more focused on human subjectivity, isn't it? It's a more human-focused concept.
Yes. I don't know where if of it intersecting with a sort of post-human approach, but I think it's very possible. They're very there's a lot of scope there for that. In a sense, I think that the thing about intersubjectivity is that it decenters all entities, which I think is at the core of what you're talking about.
Yes.
That there is this, and it's also in a sense part of the great impossibility, or the, you know, the sort of the contradictory nature of attempting to think in a post-human way as humans, to sort of, so yeah, anyway,
But I think what she's trying to say, it is impossible to think non-anthropocentric, but it's talking about empathetic entanglements, really. That's the concept. I mean, we can't escape our humanness, but we can think in empathetic ways with thinking with and acting with and making with and designing with. That's really what it's about. Did I answer your question properly? I'm not sure. You were talking about how to work with intersubjectivity within your research, weren't you?
I suppose I'm just thinking. I'm in part thinking out loud. So that's no. It's really helpful. It's really interesting. Thank you very much. I suppose one of the elements for me is that the self is so multiple. When we think about the self as being more than human, it's actually so much closer to a kind of biological reality, actually. So
yeah. And this is why she uses the idea of the situated human, because different, you know, it's very much local, specified. It breaks down that universal sort of idea of the human. So she rejects the idea of the human. The human becomes the situated human.
Do we have any more questions? I can't...
Yeah, I've got a question.
Is that you, Justin?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for that talk. It was really good. But yeah, my question was just about, with Braidotti, you were saying that for her, all matter, creatures and people are of equal importance. I was just wondering whether, you know, there's sort of some dangerous potential there for that sort of attitude to lead to a very sort of reactionary sort of politics in which human suffering is neglected, I suppose. I mean, there's the meme going around that, you know, humanity is the virus. I was wondering whether post-humanism feeds into that sort of attitude where, you know, humans are the disease, which, you know, when we're gone, the world will be a better place and that sort of stuff.
I think really, well, Haraway's work, I think, is probably quite productive to talk about COVID and in terms of those biological relatings about how we're making together. But I think both those thinkers in their methods are trying to create an awareness of the sort of inequalities, the power structures. I don't think they're trying to reject those at all by saying they're all equal, they all have agency, I think, is what she's saying. They're not passive. They're not totally subject to our needs and desires.
Right, so not necessarily of equal value, just equally agentic.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Manus, you've made a comment there, but did you want to raise it with the whole group?
I just wanted to say that, I mean, they both approach, subject formation in its becoming, which is sort of more crucial than where we land up. And so that's generally the focus across sort of post-humanities or post-human approaches. And in that sense, sort of the idea of interaction is sort of more useful as opposed to understanding. Well, there is obviously the understanding of subjects as transversal so that they cut across agents of both human, non-human material of all sorts, but also that performativities and subjectivities are then sort of part of the same, let's say, construction. And so and that formation in action is sort of more useful than thinking about subjects as fully formed. And so I think that way it's sort of quite useful as a framework, sort of Barad's work.
Both Haraway and, yeah, thanks for that comment. Both Haraway and Braidotti do use, well, this whole idea of interaction that's come from Barad is widely used by all posthumanists in different forms. It's the type of relatings, how those relatings are formed that makes each sort of differentiate. But there's also that performativity sort of accounts and how subjectivity emerges through these different interactions, or making with, or doing with, or the post-human convergence. They all kind of are the same sort of process, but they're formulated slightly differently. I love Barad's work as well, but her work, she's a physicist, I think, so her work is very much focused on matter, and it's been quite widely criticised, and because she reads everything as matter, as material matter, which can override some of the more nuanced aspects of life and living. And I mean, everything is matter in a sense, but we miss some of those fine-grained sort of nuanced aspects of planetary existence, I think. So I think Barad's had a really big influence on a lot of thinkers, including both Haraway and Braidotti.
Do we have any other questions there? We've got some additional comments in the group chat. I had a couple of questions, unless somebody else wants to jump in. I don't think they're necessarily fully formed. I mean, the first one actually was just in this discussion. Quite clearly, there's considerable use of Deleuze. Yeah. But when I'm listening to this, particularly around notions of a kind of affirmative ethics with Braidotti, I was just wondering to what extent do they draw on Spinoza's work? Because to me, the ethical dimensions of Spinoza's work is very similar to what particularly what Braidotti is advocating there. So does she explicitly or not make use of Spinoza? Yes,
she has been. She's pretty explicit in where she gets her influences from. But yeah, she has, probably not to the same extent as other thinkers, but yeah, she has drawn on Spinoza. One of her good friends who, she used to be at Sydney Uni as a Spinoza theorist, and they've worked quite a lot together.
Oh, Moira Gatens.
No, it's another woman. Oh, she lives here in Sydney. I can't remember her name, but yeah, she does work with Spinoza.
Genevieve Lloyd.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, that was just a, by the way kind of thing. Has anybody else got a question? Because I've got one other question. Is that you, Varnika? Yeah, go on, Varnika.
Thanks, Fiona. I was just wondering about post-human cartographies and how they sort of build up from the Deleuzian idea of mapping and tracing, and how they situate with that, or are they completely different?
No, she's influenced by Deleuze and Guattari quite heavily, and talks about the cartographies.
So then how does a post-human cartography work? I'm not very clear on this concept.
Well, it's basically the post-human convergence, and the playing out of those relationships, the performativity process. It's about, I've done a bit of work with developing methods for, particularly in terms of refiguring collections, and about folding out the actual entities involved, like folding out the coordinates involved and tracking their interactions, the forces and effects, as a way of, it can be a historical exercise as well as an emergent, well, it's always going to be emergent, but it can be used to track, as a method to track emergence as well. So yeah, I've tried to sort of do quite a bit of work around that, because it's not really fully formed in Braidotti's work. Yeah.
Did we have any more questions? Well, while we're waiting for somebody else, if there are any more questions, I just had a question about Braidotti's notion of transversal subjects, and to some extent I think it's probably picking up on Cymbeline's discussion around, or not so much about intersubjectivity, but I just was wondering whether or not Braidotti engages with the kind of particularly insidious aspects of identity politics and the ways in which that might, you might read that against, her notion of transversal subjects.
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. She, in terms of, it's also about the situated human again. And it's sort of like mapping out the different entities involved and their compositional processes, their emergent processes. So, it could be around particular events, it could be around particular politics. So it's the transversal subject is part of a collective or a composition of emerging processes and entities and agents and effects.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily thinking in terms of, post-human theory, but just in terms of very much a kind of humanist theory, but its relevance for critiquing.
Yeah.
Critiquing that. And I was just wondering, you said in the second part of the book, which I haven't read, that there are more kind of, I don't know whether you said empirical examples or more concrete examples. In what way does she, what kind of concrete examples does she give of notions of transversal subjects?
Well, you know, Jennifer Gabbry's work on digital rubbish. I don't know if any of you know that. And it's how human subjects are basically tied up with a whole lot of, well, she talks about electronics. So it's about these sort of actions and subjectivities, the material aspects of, you know, media. So it's all these different elements that are living non-material elements, political, capitalism. All of these elements tie into this notion of, you know, digital rubbish and environmental destruction. And it's the same with Parika's work, Jussi Parika's work around geomaterialism and about how digital media is part of the earth, has been extracted from the earth. And, you know, it plays around our subjectivities around digital media and how it's an earthly process. So that's how that sort of posthumanism, those sort of examples work in the book.
There's quite a lot of commentary here on the chat about the place of the human in post-human theory. So, which, you know, I think is an interesting point. I mean, particularly, you know, I suppose from Latour onwards, there's been these debates. So, I don't know if Justin or Manus would like to open those to the group, or we're just, have we got any more specific questions, or did people just, what did you want to do? Justin or Manus or Cymbeline?
Sorry, I was just typing something, but
no.
Yeah, no, it's a good discussion, but yeah, I think like I'm all for going beyond the nature culture binary and all that sort of stuff, but I don't think to do that you need to diminish the uniqueness and the creativity of humans. I mean, who can deny that humans are the most creative organism on the planet? I just think it's silly to deny that thing. So I think post-humanism, I think you can go too far in the direction of misanthropy, but yeah.
No, I mean, that's precisely the false binary that you would be falling for, which is that to say that to acknowledge the non-human, it must diminish the human, is precisely the false binary here. And that because it's a co-becoming, it's a co-reading of our existence, it's not about diminishing one or the other precisely. And as far as methodologically how you do that goes, is that's why it's sort of working at the margins, just like sort of Derrida, like you work at the text, you rework at the text, and so it's not sort of replacing one thing with a new thing. And because we cannot do it, and Braidotti would be the first one to say there is no way we can't just suddenly jump out of the humanist training that we've all received for, like, you know, whatever, however 100 years. And so it is always working at the margins to slowly expand new territory, to use cartographies to explore new areas rather than trying to sort of replace one with the other.
Yeah, I think you can have a gradation of value without having a binary. So, but yeah, it's a big issue. But
I think the point that you make, Justin, about misanthropy is really great. But I would say, in a sense, a misanthropic position equally centers humans. It's equally focused on humans as a sort of an exception. You know, this sort of exceptional thinking that humans are fundamentally different, fundamentally superior, fundamentally, there must be some way of, you know, searching for some way of exceptionalizing us. And in a sense, to devalue even the notion of valuing and devaluing is somehow fundamentally humanist. So in a way, it's, yeah, I think it's there's a panic there. There's a sort of a panic as we just contemplate the possibility of being decentered. And I think that happens with all every project of decentering, whether it's feminist or post-colonial. It's a sort of an inevitable panic, because it's like a fundamental sort of shift in reality or dismantling of accepted reality.
I mean, we've always been decentered. This is the whole thing. We've been quite narcissistic in the way that we think, you know, in terms of Western philosophy. We're also always subject and part of these transversal assemblages. We always have been. We've chosen to neglect and ignore these things. So, and I mean, you know, some of the, you know, climate change, for example, this is what's been driving a lot of this thinking as well, you know, environmental issues.
Sorry, Sky and I have been having a totally unacademic conversation in the background. It is,
okay.
It is related, but we're talking about engaging with the non-human in various ways. Anyway, let's leave it at that.
Oh yeah, I know, it's quite challenging. I've tried a few experiments and
well, I don't think we need to know about that, Fiona.
no, I'm not going into it, but yeah.
Just remember, everybody, we're being recorded.
Oh yeah, of course.
So, yeah. I think we've probably got time for one more question, unless we want to call it a day. Look, I think that's been a really, really fruitful discussion. I mean, I haven't engaged recently with Haraway or Braidotti's work, and I've in particular wanted to follow up on Braidotti's work. So that's been really useful for me, and it sounds like it's been really useful for a lot of other people. So I think, you know, I'd like to really not only thank Fiona, but the contributions from everybody here. I mean, it's been a really great conversation, and I think that if people have further questions, you can either, you know, you can follow up with Fiona, or you can follow up with any of the people participating here. So let's give Fiona one more thank you, I think. So
thank you for the great questions.
Yeah. No, it was really good. So anyway, well, I think we'll ask Simone to cut off the recording. Thank you. Oh no, it's on again, is it? And
yeah. Thanks, guys.
And I've got to go to another